Hello, welcome to Free Bible Commentary with Pastor Teacher Dr. Bob Utley. Be sure to visit Free Bible Commentary at www.freebiblecommentary.org. Now, here's Bob.
We've got a problem historically about who Darius was. We have absolutely no inkling from secular history, or no place really for him. For in the stele, which is the records of this ancient culture, from Nabonidus to Cyrus, there is nobody in between. Now the Bible has been ridiculed quite often because of two people that they couldn't find anything about: Belshazzar and Darius. Now, recently we have found archaeologically that Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus and co-ruler of the Babylonian Empire, while his daddy was off in the town of he was in Haram, worshiping the moon god Zen. Now, as of yet, we have no records of who this Darius was. There are three basic views, and I want to give those to you if I could, of who this man is and where he fits into history. Number one, some people say, history is silent. We believe the Bible to be true. Therefore, we accept this man as being historical without any proof. I like that. I never claimed to. I heard a guy one time say, well, we have now established the historicity of the patriarchal period. I thought, terrific. I believed in that long before you were born. So you won't say it's good. You know, the Bible just kind of says to me, it's true. I have preconceived notions. This is the Word of God, and that solves a lot of my problems. But number two, because there was a kind of a man who was Cyrus's general, and this man was a neighboring king. Some think because of the common practice of many people in this time having two names, like in Esther, her husband is called Ahasuerus, isn't it? Something like that. But in history, you know him is Xerxes. So there's obviously two names. You've got Moses' father-in-law is called by four names. Do you happen to know those? You listen to the television show Sunday? Jethro, really a derivative of that. Hobad, and Ruel. Same man, four names. So, they think this man's name that we have the name Darius the Mede was maybe Gobrias of Gudium. Does anybody here have taken that kind of history, knows how to pronounce G-U-T-I-U-M? Is it Gudium? I just don't know. Gobrias of Gudium, and he was appointed by Cyrus to rule Babylon. We know from historical records. So this may be another name for this man, and that seems pretty accurate from what happens here. The next thing some folks think is there was a Darius called Hasatris who ruled after Cyrus between BC 521 and 485. But that doesn't fit historically into the biblical record, because this man was before Cyrus, or at the same time, contemporaneous with Cyrus. So I don't think this third one will fit. This second one has much to back it up, but I really don't think it has as much as just to say history is silent. We don't know who this man was. Now, you see where it says receive the kingdom? Now, there's two different views here. It doesn't say who received it. It doesn't say who was the giver. Some think the giver is God, that Darius the Mede received the kingdom from God. Now that is very true, that God is in control of history, and God set up Nebuchadnezzar, and he sets up all the kings of the earth. But I think probably here it's not God that's being referred to, but it's Cyrus that's being referred to. And then explanation number two under who this is, Gobrias, I think it is the fact that he received the kingdom from Cyrus, and Cyrus made him co-ruler of all of the old Babylonian Empire. So I like the fact that he received the kingdom, speaking of Cyrus. And then again, down in verse 2, it'll say, talking about the king. I think the king there is not Darius the Mede, but Cyrus. So I think it fits very well. Now, you see the word satraps in verse 1, 120 satraps. This is caused some problems for some people because they say the country wasn't big enough to hold this many. And well, this thing means, the word in Persian means protector of the realm. It's not unusual to me that after a peaceful takeover, because it was relatively bloodless, this particular coup in this part of the world, that there would be a need for more of these local officials and lesser officials out in the country to keep peace. And I see no problem at all with 120. The problem that some folks try to make is they say in Esther 1:1 the number is 127, and here it's 120. But Esther is a completely different situation in time, and therefore I don't think there's any historical problem at all about the dating here. Now, down in verse 2, where it talks about that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Well, the reason for all these were, if you please, IRS officials. These are the guys who are running around collecting the money from all these new people to keep the king in all his splendor. And so, really, these satraps are IRS guys. And the king, I think, there fits very well. If it was going to be Darius, why didn't it have it there? It says the king, and I don't think it's a name for him because he's not called anywhere. I think it's referring to Cyrus. Okay? And then down in verse 5, where it says, political jealousy is going to enter in verse 4, and these guys, these other presidents, are going to get nervous about Daniel. And I think that we have some other biblical allusions to that. Remember when David, it was Vernon's story Sunday to the kids. Remember when David went out and fought Goliath, and Saul was walking home from the battle, and he heard some people singing, and they said, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his... And what did it do to Saul? What did it do to him? Made him jealous. And what did he do from that day on? He hated David, tried to kill him. So you see, this idea of political pride or jealousy runs all through the Bible, and the Bible doesn't try to show us just the good side of men. I think we have a problem with jealousy sometime in our day, don't you? Don't you sometimes just get a little bit of green with envy about what other people have and do? I even find it in the church with spiritual gifts. Isn't that exactly what 1 Corinthians 12 through 14 is all about? Spiritual jealousy about positions in the church. Yeah, it's with us. It's always with us. It's a part of our fallen nature to want what somebody else has. And I'll give you an example. Peggy and I lived in Marshall, Texas, which is close to the most wonderful fishing lakes in all the world. Toledo Bend's there, Lake of the Pines are there, everything's there. We went one time in 4 years. So we moved to Fort Worth. Then they got Six Flags and everything. We never went to Six Flags in Fort Worth. So what we do? We moved to Lubbock. And now we want to go where? To Lake of the Pines and Six Flags. Now, isn't it always kind of dumb that we want what we don't seem to have? It's always the grass is greener ideal, isn't it? And it's the same thing if these guys wonder what Daniel had. Now, I think sometimes that when we realize what real power does to people, that we might not want those positions. Sometimes responsibility of those things that we think are so good, when we get there we think, it wasn't as hot as I thought it was. Well, anyway, they conspired against Daniel, and they couldn't find anything wrong in his political life whatsoever. They couldn't find any cheating, any graft there. So what did they pick to get him on? The law of God, didn't they? And I want to say something to you I think is very important. I say it over and over again, but I think every time I can find a biblical example, I need to use it. The law of God for Daniel was not something that he believed. It was not something that he signed. It was not something he, held an oath to allegiance to. The law of God for Daniel was something he lived. And they were going to try to trick him because of his lifestyle. Now, friends, Christianity is not something you believe, not an oath you took at one time, not a set of doctrines you sign, but Christianity is a what? Lifestyle. 24 hours a day, in all circumstances, everywhere you are, Christianity is a way of life. Now, I think it's very important there. Notice verse 6. Then these commissioners and satraps came. Now, what does your translation have? Mine has by agreement, but it has a little one. And a little one in my translation means see the margin. And in the margin it has the word thronging. Now, what does your translation have there? King what? Assemble together, King James, or okay, somebody else. What do you have? Living Bible. What does it have? Excuse me? Anybody have a Living Bible tonight? Tumultuously. Okay. Any other translations here tonight? No. In verse 6. The satraps, the commissioners, came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live on. So what is that? Do you have a translation there? By agreement. The word here means tumultuous thronging, like a riot. They just kind of, it's a picture of them pushing the door and running up to the throne. What's the problem with that? Why can't that be the translation? Not to an Oriental monarch, do you? I mean, he cut off folks' heads for spitting on the palace floor, much less running into his throne room. Friends, these are Oriental monarchs. They had total control of life or death in wide areas of the world. You just don't bust in on them. And when you get there, you sure don't just have a little running around the throne kind of thing. So there's other examples of this word used in the Psalms where it means came by a mutual consent. Many times it means came with a conspiracy in mind. I think that fits better much here. They came with a preconceived conspiracy to bring before the king. And so if you have a different translation there, put a little one in yours and put in the margin by conspiracy. Okay? I think it'll mean more. Now, notice the last part of verse 7. Here's what they want to do. Anyone who makes a petition to any god or man beside you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. All right. What did this mean to the king? What was the implications of this for the king himself? What were they playing on? You bet. So it was almost like saying, we want you to be like a god. I was reading one of Criswell's books, and he asked his lady, he said, have any of you ever been on the Queen for a Day show? And then he says, this guy was on God for a Month show. Well, that's kind of what it is, isn't it? Now, there's a real problem here because this man was a Zoroastrian. They're called different words back there, but same thing. And apparently what this meant was that he, as the representative of, you know the name of the god in Zoroastrianism? Ahura Mazda. Ever heard of that? You heard of Mazda. That's where they got it from. Ahura Mazda. And he was the representative of Ahura Mazda on earth, and therefore they think that it was going to be, it was a time not so much of him being a god, the king, but that all the peoples in all his land would have to worship his God by praying to him and through him. I don't know exactly. It seems to me this king was a little dumb and a little ego-struck. But so was Nebuchadnezzar and all the rest of them, Belshazzar. So why should it be so surprised? When you give a man total power over life or death, it corrupts him. It corrupts him. And it got to this guy. Now, he signed the deal, and then verse 8 it says, and it may not be changed. Now, if you'll write down the side of your Bible, Esther 1:19, Esther 8:8, the same thing happens in Esther because Esther's husband is also a Persian king. And it's the law of the Medes and the Persians, or the Persians and the Medes, depending on who's speaking, whether it's a Mede or a Persian. Their name always goes first. Now, it simply means that if that king signed a law, that law was it. Now, remember when Esther's husband wanted to save the Jews, he didn't revoke the law he had written before, did he? He wrote another law that in practicality counteracted that first law. Now, this guy made a dumb move, but he could not retract the law. So Daniel had to go in the lion's den at least one night. So it could not be changed, and these underlings knew that. Now, look in verse 10. Three things very important, I think, here. Notice that he went up to his roof chamber, opened the windows toward Jerusalem, continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God. Now, I want you're preaching. You're the preacher for Sunday morning. And you've got to preach on this text. One verse, verse 10. I want you to outline for me your sermon on verse 10. Think about it a few minutes. Now think about it, because I'm going to call on you, because I don't think you'll volunteer for this one. I want you to outline the sermon that you would preach on verse 10. I don't want no deathbed stories either. No poems, just the outline. Verse 10. Bobby, you got one? What a chicken excuse. Jennifer, you got one? Okay, that's good. All right. Okay, someone else volunteer for me. Yes. You can't read your own writing. Okay, daily prayer. All right. Mark, what do you got? Okay. Okay, Jim, what do you got? I see you writing there. Worship in spite of circumstances, maybe. Okay, what about point number 2? Okay, good. Very good. Phil, what do you got? I may call you to preach Sunday. Anybody got one? Faye, did you get a good one? Ann, did you get anyone? Okay. Let me kind of give it. Yeah, Don? Okay. Gary, did you get one? All right, good. Y'all going to preach a one-point sermon? Let me give you what I think is an outline of this that I think would be meaningful to me if I was going to preach. Number 1, let's talk about fear, yet worship of God in any circumstance. That's number 1. Number 2, notice he had a particular way of expressing his faith. He opened the windows toward Jerusalem he had a habit of life that was reverence toward God, right? Number 3, he had a habit of life that meant he prayed daily, right? And I think the element of prayer that impresses me so much is in the middle of bad circumstances, he thanked God. Now, let's go back to it because I got some verses to give you. Number 1, is it unusual? Now, we kind of make fun of other religions sometimes to our own detriment, but we kind of, say, boy, those Muslims, they want to pray and face toward Mecca. And who knows where Mecca is? The Jews, did more than Daniel ever face toward Jerusalem? Was it a characteristic? It certainly was. Did you know that? Let me give you the verses, please. Write these down. They're not in your outline tonight. 1 Kings 8, 44 and 48. 1 Chronicles. That's just a parallel passage, really, so you don't have to put it 6:34 if you want it. Psalms 5, 7. Psalms 28, 2. Psalms 138, 2. And Jonah 2:4. Now that's enough references to me that I think it was a characteristic to pray toward Jerusalem. Now, why is it so important to pray toward Jerusalem? God can hear your prayer anywhere, can He? Okay. Now, what I'm asking you for is put your mind back in a Hebrew frame of reference now. Don't think Western. Don't think United States. Don't think New Testament on me. I'm taking the Old Testament, real Old Testament. Now, why was it so important to the Hebrew in the Old Testament to face toward Jerusalem? Yeah, in the temple. That's where God dwelt, friends, on that mercy seat between those cherubim. That's where God's presence on earth was. Now, remember Naaman? Excuse me? I think he did. I've forgotten dedicatory prayer there. May have been. I didn't pick that up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're right. Also, remember when Naaman was cured of leprosy? What did he take home with him? Dirt from the place where he was, where God healed him. Now, why? Because in the older parts of the Old Testament, the deity was identified with a particular geographical location. That's why Baal was always worshipped where? The high places. That's why Yahweh was worshipped. He was, the idea of God being a storm god comes from the Sinai experience. Now, I think toward Jerusalem, because that's where they knew God dwelt. They knew God was the God of Israel. And friends, they looked. How many of you have ever got to where it's really hard in your life and you've gone back to a place where you've had an experience with God in the years before? You ever done that? I think I told you once, there's a hill outside of the city of Houston where I had a tremendous experience with the Lord. I remember going back there one time in my life, going back. Just there's something about that place. That's why the place where we find the Lord, the church where you were saved, has a special ring to you, doesn't it? Even though you're hundreds of miles away. Special. So I think the same thing is here. Face toward Jerusalem. Now, 3 times a day. Well, first of all, how about kneeling? Is kneeling unusual? What was the stance of prayer in the Old Testament? Do you know? Standing, head bowed, eyes closed, hands up, standing up. It was kneeling with the hands up. You ever seen a picture of that? Yes, you have. That's the Old Testament way of praying. Now you say, prove it. Get your pencil. 1 Kings 8:54. Psalms 95:6. Isaiah 45:23. Kneeling with hands uplifted. I think the symbols there are very beautiful. The sense of kneeling is the sense of humility in the presence of God, the sense of open hands, the sense of receiving from God. So, I think it's very beautiful. Yes. Okay, that's not so much a stance of prayer is. Have you ever seen a little kid come and sing a song in church and they get so in the rhythm, boy, they start. Well, see, the Hebrew is a cadence kind of reading, and a good cantor, in the Hebrew church or synagogue is someone who reads the scripture in that cadence. And boy, you can just get into it, And their scripture is poetical enough that you can just mark it out, And they get to rocking. You've ever seen a Jew in front of the Wailing Wall? Well, see, he's reading Hebrew, and as he reads that Hebrew in that cadence, he begins to rock. You see. And that's what it is. More rhythm, I think, than it is anything else. I just want to say to you that in the New Testament there are many ways to pray. Jesus prayed in his face. That doesn't mean that we should pray on our face every day. It doesn't mean we should kneel every time. It's simply, I think, the New Testament, as our understanding of God has deepened, I think, we understand that prayer is not so much a position of the body as a position of the heart. So you can pray in a closet or you can pray on a rooftop. I pray very often driving the car. I don't know if you pray with your eyes open. I enjoy that, and I do that very often. Now, you see where it says praying and giving thanks? Would you please put CF Philippians 4:6? Somebody quote Philippians 4:6 to me? Can you, Cynthia? I saw you smile. Can you quote Philippians 4:6? Thanks. It's about in everything by prayer and supplication at your request. Huh? Okay. It includes the idea of supplication and thanksgiving. That's exactly what Daniel's doing. You know he's not praying that it may rain somewhere over in Babylon. He's saying, now, Lord, I know those guys are out there somewhere. I know they're going to come for me. I want to thank you, even now. So, beautiful, I think. Now, verse 11. They found Daniel making petition. Now, let's talk about this upper room. It's used quite often. Entered his house, his roof chamber. When I say roof chamber to you, what do you think I'm thinking about? Well, Oriental house. No windows on the street, and if they are, they're up real high because of burglars. And there's no screens, but there's lattice work. Okay, so he opened the lattice work, apparently toward Jerusalem. That's where he prayed. Now they saw him. Now they were watching for him, weren't they? They either were watching in the street or from another building, or they were in his house. Now I don't know where they were, but you know Daniel must have smiled to himself. And now tell me, how old is Daniel? Huh? We don't know exactly, but probably because of the reign of the first king, Nebuchadnezzar, he is 80 plus, close to 90. I pray to God when I'm 90 years old, I can get down on my knees and get up. Anyway, here came all these young, new, enthusiastic politicians and grabbed this 90-year-old man off his knees in prayer and dragged him before the king. That's a picture of the world, isn't it? Any price. Now, here again we find that, let's see, I think I'll skip on over. Verse 13 is where I want to stop this time. And they answered and spoke to the king. Daniel, who is one of the presidents, pays no attention to you. Is that what he says? Verse 13. Daniel, who is one of our colleagues, pays no attention to you. Daniel, the smartest man in the realm. Daniel, the revealer of dreams. No? What are they going to pick on? They're going to pick on his race, aren't they? Old Jew boy over here is causing trouble again. Friends, I want to tell you what. I'm a bigot in a sense. I really am. I'm very prejudiced against some people. And you know who I'm prejudiced against? Folks who are prejudiced. And that's just as bad as them. So I know I got faults in my own heart, so I don't cast many stones. But I want to tell you what. Prejudice is simply not of God. My kind's not of God. Probably your kind's not of God. We all have to fight that. And by the way, it has amazed me how prejudice runs. Depends on what part of the country you are. Many parts of the United States is particular kind of races, like Mexican American, Indian, Negro. But in some parts of the United States, it's not race at all. It's ethical origin, like in New York in the turn of the century, and early Jews were just discriminated against unbelievably. And how about over in India? It's not racial or ethnic at all. You know what it is? It's caste. One group, same blood you are, but they're different castes. So they're just. Have you ever thought maybe that prejudice is a characteristic of fallen nature to make yourself feel better at the expense of somebody else? Now, notice in verse 16, my translation has, the king spoke and said to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. Now, does that sound like your translation? Your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. Now, mine has a marginal note, and the marginal note I like better than the text. The marginal note from mine says, may your God whom you constantly serve deliver you. I think it's a question, it's a request, it's not a statement. Now, the lion's den was kind of an unusual kind of thing. We don't know if it was a pit or an old clay pit or what, but it was some kind of thing that you could put a rock over the hole at the top, and people could apparently let in the top, and it must have been a door on the side or something to let the people in and out, the lions in and out or something. So exactly what it is, we don't know. But again, can you see a 90-year-old man thrown in the top of the lion's den? I mean, the fall should have killed him. Well, the king says, all right, I can't change the law. He tried to change it, couldn't. Look at verse 18. The king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought to him, and sleep fled to him. Now, when it says fasting, now I want to give you a hermeneutical principle, please, and listen very carefully about interpreting the Bible. If you don't watch it, every time you hear an English word that you know what it means in your culture, in your understanding, you'll place your understanding of the word fasting back into another person's life and culture. Now, fasting here has nothing to do with religious fasting. It has nothing to do with going without food. That we talk about New Testament fasting. It means this guy was so worried that he had a hungry night. It has nothing to do. Completely, totally different word for religious fasting and simply going without food. This is the word for going without food. But I bet you when you read that, you thought, now he's fasting to his gods or something. You see how we put our understanding of words back into the Bible? Be very careful for the historical context. You've got to look at that day and time and not your own. Now, notice when it says no entertainment was brought to him. That is a word that we just don't know what it means. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, and we don't know exactly what it means. Here are the theories. And they're very interesting because let me tell you what. When it comes to a word you don't know what it means, everybody's supposed to pray about it, right? And God will reveal them exactly what it means. Is that right? It doesn't work that way. Sincere people pray about it. Sincere people trust God. And I'm going to give you 4 interpretations of some sincere people, okay? Number 1, if you're familiar with Jewish rabbinical theology, Ibn Ezra is a real biggie. And Ibn Ezra and John Calvin both said that this word is kind of similar to a word meaning to strike. And so they get it from the word to strike. They get striking on a musical instrument. Music. He had no music that night. Okay. Theodotion in a translation called the Peshitta, says that because of the mention of the word food and fasting, that he had no food brought to him that night. And then the Revised Standard Version, and no one less than Martin Luther himself said, because of the idea of the word diversion or pleasure, if that's what it's speaking about. Now, I like the 4th one better than all. I think it fits better. The Jerusalem Bible, which is the New Jewish translation of the Old Testament, translates this as concubines, which means he had no women that night. Now, knowing the Oriental monarch, that fits much better to me than the rest. So, but see how many different interpretations come from one word that we don't know what it means? It's liable to mean he lost his Scrabble game, for all we know. So we just don't know what it means. Now, verse 22, 2 things very important. Number 1, I think, God sent his angel. Friend, if you ever want to talk about a guardian angel, you got one right here in Daniel. You say, well, the lions weren't hungry. Wait a minute. They're going to gobble a bunch of folks up in a second before they ever hit the ground. So God sent his angel. Now, I don't know if you believe in guardian angels. I was going to just quote to you some other scriptures, but I decided not to because I think you get spoiled to me spoon-feeding you scriptures and you don't look them up. I want to say to you there are some scriptures in the New Testament that to me solidly prove the existence of guardian angels, at least for children and for nations. And the implication is there for all of us. But I want you to find them. And next Wednesday night I'm going to ask you for them. Okay? The New Testament places, at least 2, one in the Gospels and one much farther down, about guardian angels. Where are they? How do you find it? Okay. Now, the second one. He shut the mouths of the lions. I want to give you... John, will you run in my office and get a book off my desk called the Apocrypha? It's a paperback and it's orange. I want to read the Apocrypha. It's on my desk, orange paperback. This idea of shutting the mouth of the lions is mentioned in Hebrews 11:13, and it's also mentioned in a book called First Maccabees. Ever heard of this? You ever heard of a book called First Maccabees? Now, First Maccabees is in the Catholic Bible. It's not in ours. And when John brings that book to me, I want to read this section out of it. Because many of these things you never have read, but I want to tell you, if you didn't know better, if you just picked them up, you really couldn't tell them from Scripture most of the time. You have to really get down, look at the theology, and look at the date. So I want to read part of that to you. When he gets back, I'll do that. Now, look at verse 24, and this is hard for us to understand. King gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them and their children and their wives into the lion's den. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Lions weren't hungry? Why were the children and the wives thrown in? Good. Thank you, John. I was afraid you couldn't get in. What? Excuse me? Okay. That's one real possibility. Okay. Anybody else? Why did Achan, when he stole the mantle out of Jericho, why was his wife and children and cattle killed with him? Now here's the real clincher. Think with me. Achan sinned. His wife, his children, and his cattle had to pay. These presidents sinned. Their wives and their children had to pay. Adam sinned. Who had to pay? Okay, now that's exactly where this whole thing, original sin, I think, comes from. It's the Hebrew, Oriental, Semitic idea of corporality. If a person in the tribe sinned, the tribe was affected. If Israel sinned, all Israel was affected. It's the idea that you were a part of a group, a tribe, a clan, a nation. If you sinned, it affected that whole thing. Remember when Achan sinned? The next day Israel went to battle. Many, many Israeli men died that day because of the sin of Achan. Now, they didn't steal that out of Jericho, did they? No. But they died. They lost the battle that next day because of Achan's sin. That's the Hebrew mind's sense of corporality. And that's where I think the idea of Adam being the figurehead of the race, falling, and all mankind falling with him comes from. It's a very significant idea. I want to read 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 59 through 60. I'm going to start about 57. David, for being merciful, inherited a royal throne forever. Elijah, for his intense zeal for the law, was caught up into heaven. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael had faith in God and were saved from the fire. Daniel, for his innocence, was delivered from the mouths of the lions. Observe this from generation to generation, that none who hope in him will fail in strength. And do not be afraid of the words of sinful man, for his glory will turn to dung and to worms. Today he will be exalted, tomorrow he will be nowhere to be found, for he has returned to dust, and what is plowed will perish. My children, be manful and strong for the law, for by it you will obtain glory. And on it goes. If you want something interesting sometime, come and borrow this book from me called the Apocrypha. It has the book of the Maccabees. It has the additions to Daniel called Bel and the Dragon, and it'll be very interesting to you. The Roman Catholic Church considers this book to be authoritative. That's where they get purgatory from, a little book called The Shepherd of Hermas, which is not in here. It's another set called the, let me think. These are Old Testament books. The other is a New Testament book. So try it sometime. It'll be interesting to you. Now, notice the decree in 25 through 27. Notice the last number question. Was Darius' decree, does it show that he became a believer? Now I want you to read 25 through 27 and tell me if he became a believer. Why? The language sounds very good, doesn't it? I mean, it's a very lofty kind of language about God. The living God, enduring forever, kingdom never be destroyed, dominion forever, delivers, rescues, performs signs and wonders in heaven and earth, and all, and on and on. Now, huh? No, matter of fact, he really doesn't say that he renounces his gods, you see. He just makes God one of many. See, it's the typical ideal of a polytheist. Oh, you got a good God? Well, bring him on in. Yeah, we'll take all we can get. You know, anything it helps, we will try it. You got a God that works? Well, we'll add him to ours. Now, that's really a sign of our day, you know it. I wonder how many folks, in searching for real peace, join every church and every movement and every group they can just to make sure they hit it some way. You know, I just wonder. I don't know if he was a believer or not. I hope we see these guys in heaven. My inclination is that we want that they're just Oriental polytheists who saw a miraculous power of God and were marveled by it. Just like the people in the last days are going to see the power of the devil manifested in signs and wonders, and the Bible says that if it were possible, they would draw away even God's elect. Mark? Oriental? Well, everything from the Mediterranean over is Oriental. You see, it's not European and it's not African, so everything over that way is Asian or Oriental. And Palestine is really an Oriental. Their philosophy is Eastern, not Western. See, Russia, one reason we have such a problem with Russia and trying to understand them and talking to them, they have a Eastern mind. They just look at things different. They don't look at things. See, Europe and over America has one kind of train or thought pattern, but Russia over has another one, just like Africa downward has another one. And we use the same words, but we just don't mean the same things, you know. Just like the Indians in the United States. You talk to them about, you show kindness, you know. It was a sign of weakness to them, you see. Different mindset. That's what happens sometimes when we try to interpret the Bible strictly through United States culture. You can't do it. Can't do it.